Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Daily Dandy today. Our guest is Tony Sylvester, lead singer of Turbonegro and style icon. Just gonna wait for him to join. I've been painting my study all day. Looks pretty good. I'm going to do change the format this coming week. So stay tuned and I'll post about that also. All right, here's Tony.
Well,
Hello.
hello. How are we?
Good. How are you?
Oh, mustn't
What
grumble, as they say.
What are you drinking? Is that wine?
It is wine, indeed. It's white wine.
In a stemless tumbler.
Like French kind of style. Like I'm in like a bistro, in the provinces
Yeah.
somewhere. Look
Yeah.
at you, all.
I shaved just for you.
I like it. Takes years off you.
Oh, thanks.
I
Um,
mean, you know,
how have you been?
nice. Now, up and down like a bride's nightie, like they say.
Did they say that? I didn't know that, but I like it.
No, it's a classic English one for you there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's sort of hour to hour. It's not even day to day.
Yeah.
It's sort of like you have these like chunks of, good positive things, and then it just sort of seems to dash, and then it kind of regroups.
Yeah. It feels like a vacation until it doesn't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think what's worse than what's happening now is the prospect of it changing.
Yeah. Either for the better or the worse.
Exactly. I'm just like, I'm fine. I'm used to this now.
Yeah. At the same time that I want it to go back to normal, I dread it going back to normal.
Yeah, well, not to get
Well,
all
not that it's
off
going to
the,
get back to normal.
yeah, exactly, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
We know that's for another podcast. I don't know that. No. I'm getting used to whatever this new normality is, and
Mhm.
long may it continue, etc., etc.
And you've been
Yes.
reveling in robes.
Yeah, I had a little thing. What I was a bit manic. I'd just come off the back of doing quite a lot of content for Timothy Everest, the tailor I work for, in a short amount of time because we had this furlough system here with work, which I don't know if you had, where the government very kindly told employers that they would pay 80% of the employer's wage
Okay.
if
Yeah.
they
We don't have a
if
government.
they
I haven't been
furloughed.
paying
No, I
attention.
know it's a different situation. I mean, they're not great over here, but
Right.
and so it was like, quick, you're going to be furloughed. Do 3 months worth of work. So it's like,
Yeah.
all right. So kind of came off the back of that and wanted to do something. So was thinking about my something to do and something to work around, something to kind of research and it was and it was quite fun. And friends of mine in Vienna,
Mhm.
a friend of mine, Praline, who has a brand called Pila Malt, had sent me a really nice care package of some pajamas and a robe, and I just thought, well, this is the time. And yeah, it's interesting. I kind of feel like there's a lot more to it than I really scratched. There's obviously some commonality between men choosing to have themselves portrayed in that way.
Mm.
And so what is that? So that's what I started thinking about, was like, and maybe I didn't get quite so far in the series with that, but like, why would you choose? There's a looseness and a decadence
Mhm.
and something else that obviously comes with it. And so why would you be chosen to do like that? And I think it's a difference between this very linear sense of what you wear to work and what you wear to not work. So therefore, if you're portraying yourself as someone who's not working,
Mm.
what are you saying? So of course, if you look at the people who did, it was, there's kind of two or three different groups. There's actors, whereas of course that's fairly obvious. It's just like they wanted to show this kind of this whatever it was, unattainable life that they had, which
Mhm.
normal people want. But then also gangsters. If you look,
Oh.
there's a lot of that, because it's the same thing. It's like saying, I'm not a sucker like you, I'm not working.
Mhm.
And then and so it's quite interesting. You see the parallels of like, why would they be chosen to, I don't
Yeah. Well, I think a
know.
lot of people have this association with a sort of Hugh Hefner kind of playboy
Same thing.
feeling. But then
Yeah.
I remember after he died, I read an appraisal of him by someone who knew him and talked about how sort of gross it was at the end that he was just sitting around in sort of age old pajamas, getting more
Yeah.
and more feeble and just being a creep. Um, it went from being this kind of symbol of elegance and leisure to being kind of like, Howard Hughes kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I mean, and that's a problem with being maybe quarantined. Like there is the Howard Hughes jokes come thick and fast in this
right.
house,
Yeah.
like
Well, there's a thin line between a dressing gown and a hospital gown, right?
exactly,
Yeah,
the robe de convalescence, something we've talked about
that's
before,
right.
which is like one of my favorite sort of pieces. These
Yeah.
French incredible shawl-collared short jackets that they wore, which are effectively what, what soldiers and members of the military wore to get over terrible things that had happened to them. And,
Yeah.
we look at them like, oh, look at that, looks great. Kind of
Yeah.
forgetting the context of these awful, places these people found themselves.
Yeah. Do you know about Dr. Posey?
No.
There's so obviously, I live in the Madame X house, so we've been reading a lot about John Singer Sargent. One of his other famous paintings is of this guy, Dr. Pozzi, who was an Italian-French gynecologist. And there's a portrait of him called The Man in the Red Robe. And he's wearing this red robe and twirling the tassel.
Okay.
Looking very kind of sexy. And he was also, not only was he the greatest gynecologist in Paris, he was also sleeping with everyone's wife. And
comes to the territory.
The story of his death is great because he performed penile surgery on someone who was impotent. No, sorry, he performed penile surgery on someone who wanted a penile enlargement. And this is like, late 19th century.
Not like it is today, like to a penny, like,
right. And the guy ended up being impotent after the surgery. So he shot Pozzi, and then Pozzi directed the surgery to get the bullet out of him and died on the operating table while he was telling people how to operate. So there's a new biography of him out.
And you didn't write it?
No, I didn't write. I was reading a biography of Sargent, and I thought, oh, wow, I should write a biography of this guy. And then like a month later, the biography of that guy came out.
Yeah, always. I know.
Well,
there you go.
Or something.
We should do this more often,
I know.
You don't need an audience for this. This is what I miss about not seeing you, Natty. These kind of conversations.
We should have a chat with Lee John, too.
Let's not. But
I wanted to ask you, so we first met when I was doing I Am Dandy.
Correct.
And you ended up being one of the kind of most commented on and admired people in the book of all these characters.
Okay. Thank you.
The people that the people that resonated with readers were the ones that were unexpected in some ways. And we had people who were, because people have a very clear idea of what a dandy is. And so people who had a job that people didn't expect, or people who had, who were a race that they didn't expect, or all kinds of things. And I think for you, your style and your body and everything, you were bearded and butch, which wasn't what people were kind of coming into this thinking a dandy looked like. And so we had a lot of guys who, and your style itself incorporated workwear and military wear and more kind of quote unquote masculine styles, I guess. And people have loved this and they've commented on it.
Oh, thank you.
And,
well, that's nice to hear. Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about that in the book, though, coming back to that thing of Oscar Wilde, which, definitely say in the book, which is, there is this misconception that he was this kind of fey, pale, sort of, shrinking violet or something, when he was, a big guy and a tough guy, and got himself in all sorts of scrapes, which he had to deal with physically, on more than one occasion, which is that, and was definitely up for the task. And I think there's probably a misconception, maybe about someone who cares about their appearance or things about that, with also this kind of maybe a femininity or something else, or coming back to what we're saying about the robes and decadence and that being, associated with femininity, which of course just isn't true. But that's nice to hear. I mean, I really, one of the things I really like about being in that book at the time is that I was wearing a beret, which is something I did a lot at the time, which has now become a bit more of a thing. And so I'm kind of glad that I'm in the book wearing a beret that early on.
there's proof that you were the truth.
Exactly.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
before these new jacks, you know.
Yeah,
Like.
no, you were definitely the first guy I knew to be
No,
very
no, I
true.
mean, definitely not. But that's the other thing. Is it's like it's about being in the middle of something, not being the beginning of something or being at the end of something. And I quite like that there's a continuity to what I'm doing in that book to kind of how I do now. But also, I like seeing the things in that book where I'm like, oh, you know, wouldn't wear that. You know, that's also the beauty of it. You know, is how much you kind of change and move on, and how you adapt. So no, I'm you know, very grateful that you did, and it was a, you know, it was a good thing for me at the time with my headspace to be sort of to think about myself in that way, and you know, and I like that I like that both you and Rose have kind of gone on and you know and pushed it further and done more with the subject
Thank you.
and yeah,
Um,
yeah,
Speaking of sort of changing, I mean, you and I come from subcultures and stuff, and so we've been
we
through all
do,
different phases.
yeah,
And I found, I think it's changing a little bit now, but at one point, not so long ago, in the menswear world, um, there was this kind of idea that there's a sort of perfect style that should be unchanging.
mm.
It's quite a conservative idea, and I think there's some people who subscribe to this idea that you shouldn't be, you know, if you look at a picture of yourself years from now, you should basically, you know, still think you look good or something. You shouldn't look back and cringe at anything, which seems strange to me because I think people naturally evolve. Otherwise, they're kind of forcing themselves not to. You know, even
Funny enough, I had this conversation with Ben Phillips, a really good friend of mine who I think you have met like on one occasion, and we were saying that like there's a sense, I think, especially if you come from a subculture, that maybe there's people from that subculture who look at you in this way now, where they're like, "Well, you've changed," you know, as a negative, and you think, and then you think, "Well, you're the same." As the
yeah,
negative, and this disparity between these two things are just like, I don't really understand the idea of not, you know, I think it's a very easy position to take up that unchanging from something is somehow, you know, is somehow a positive thing, and it's also somehow a kind, you know, somehow there's something again like you're quite butch about remaining true and sticking to something when changing your opinion or changing with things is a much more sensible way to approach life.
yeah, one would hope.
Yeah, but not in a way that's like contradictory. If you can see a through line through it all, and that's hopefully, I think that, I mean, it took me a long time to realize that maybe the contradictory things within my character or within my interests were actually not negative, and were actually probably the things that made me the way I am. And I think it takes a lot of time, and I think it probably takes a little bit more confidence to realize that, rather than just like, well, you know, there's a checklist of things that I like personally, and they don't really marry up. So therefore, should I ditch some of these things, or should I not, or what should I hold on to? And I think so I think, and that's it almost feels like an external force telling you to not like something or not do something. So I think once you kind of have established your own center or your own core, and you have confidence in that, then you're able to say, well, you know, I can ditch these things, and I can dutch, and it won't necessarily change the nature of who I am. You know, I can, feels okay to do that. And I think that's the other thing, is that as you know, people ask me all the time, I don't understand how you can be into this and be into that, or do this, you know, to be in the band and do this, but also be into the things that you're into. And it's the same. I don't have to explain it. You know, it just is. Those are the things I like, and those are the things I do. And I do not have to explain to you if they make sense or not. You know, but it took me a while to get to that point. You know, as a,
Yeah, I think it's funny because I sometimes see people, you know, post pictures of themselves from 5 years ago, and they go, "Oh, I can't believe what I was wearing back then." And I find that if you've got a kind of more, if you've got a bit of perspective on the fact that you are going to change, because I mean, when someone does that, I always think, well, do you think that in 4 years you're not going to look back at your pictures and think that there are things you would have done differently now?
yeah.
And so I think that if you have that kind of perspective, it can help you understand your present as well.
Absolutely, totally.
If you know some of this is going to change, and that's okay.
That's totally okay. And especially with me, with the, you know, my wife talks about this a lot, because she probably is a better judge of what I do and how I do it than I am, because I'm kind of too wrapped up in the moment. But she says that when I get like a new piece of clothing or new style, she sees me, but I'm going, oh, let me try this. And so something comes into the house, and then I'll wear it solidly in different ways for like 2 or 3 weeks. And then it either enters into a rotation or it doesn't. And it gets kind of like, shoved off. And she, this drives her crazy because she sees me with my new, a little micro obsession.
Right.
And then how long it lasts. And then it'll either bed in, as I say, and, be part of the uniform and come out on occasion, or it just gets done. But that's the way it is. It's just like, I don't know if I'm going to look good in that thing until I try it, or I don't know if this thing's going to work, with it until I try it. So I'd rather do that than like not try at all, So yeah, of course, there are times there are definitely, mistakes or things I might have, or things I've worn that are utterly ridiculous, that don't quite work. But at the same time, I think I always like being at that parameter of good taste. I always like pushing that ceiling of whether it's acceptable or not, or whether it's kind of like will look good or not,
Yeah.
And there's definitely things I've worn that don't work,
Right.
but I would never have known unless I tried.
Yeah. You've just hit on something that I was planning on asking, which is, do you believe that there's such a thing as good and bad taste, or is it all relative?
I've been working on a piece on this, funnily enough, actually. I think that good taste is very problematic, and I think it comes from a falsehood. And I think that when people look back, they tend to look back through very sepia-toned idealism of what people wore in the past, and then seem to only remember the things that they view now as good taste. And I think that when you actually look at more contemporary sources of any period of time, of what people wore and how they decorated their homes and what taste they had, the taste is a lot wilder and a lot less conservative than they think it is. And especially when they think of things like the golden age, so-called golden ages of things, I think that their view of things is wrong. And I don't want to say too much because I'm still kind of thinking about it. But there is definitely a great friend, Terry Ellis, who is in Japan at the moment, spends time between London and Japan, works with Fenneca there. We talk a lot, the running joke for us is the tyranny of good taste, like this idea that you're hemmed in by something being tasteful or not, and how it's kind of, I mean, Jesus, look at this shirt, for God's sake,
Well,
it's
yeah, it's such an important part, I think, of punk's legacy as far as fashion goes. It was all about sort of testing the bounds of good taste.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that John Waters has made a career out of. It's like it's something that you can actually use, I think, as a tool.
Totally.
In developing your own style.
Absolutely, and I think also the more I learn about I also think that when people think about subcultures, and punk's a good example, they think of these things as always being year zeros and things that kind of like came away and like washed things previously, because that's the way you're kind of taught about them. There was hippies, and then there wasn't hippies, then there was punks, and then there wasn't, and then there was something else, and you see it as these kind of, but it's never really like that. It's always much more amorphous. And one of the things, I had a really good conversation with Jeremy Hackett, of all people. He used to have a shoe shop with Ashley Lloyd Jennings, who was his partner at the time. So before they were Hackett, they were called Ashley Lloyd Jennings. It was the pair of them, and the guy who owned the Roxy and all of those kind of punk guys used to come and buy Albert slippers, velvet slippers from them in Covent Garden and wear those. And that was the shoe of choice in like sort of 75, 70, 76, 77 amongst the kind of upper echelons of like the punk things. And I'm like, that's great, because that's lost, like no one knows that. That's not in the history books. And those are the kind of things that I like, those kind of like in between movements, that like the Terrace Boy glam of like the mid 70s, the kind of Bowie and like skinhead crossover weird thing. That's huge to me. I love that. Yeah. What Slade kind of like tapped into, those kind of looks, all these kind of in between scenes.
Yeah.
There's a writer called Paul Gorman who's here in London who writes a lot about those like in between sort of scenes and that kind of period, and it's really fascinating to me because it's not documented. Everyone wants a very simplified linear history of things, and it's just not like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's always outliers, and there's always strange, you know, hybrids, and there's always things that don't fit in and don't quite, and that's where all the kind of interest is for me.
Something's not really a subculture until it's, I mean, something can't be defined as a subculture until it's already been around for a little while, because you sort of won't know that that's what it is, right? Because
exactly, anyone who's doing it in real time is unaware, because it's not codified and it's not it's not set in stone yet. That's right.
I interviewed Paolo Hewitt once, and I said, "Were mods dandies?" And he said, "No, but the first mod was."
Yeah.
You know.
Well, that was exactly it. And I remember thinking about this when, you know, at the time, where it's a few years ago, I had a similar thought, because exactly, it's like the mod guy was probably also a teddy boy when he was 15. And then he was the same guy. So when you read the books, you're like, there was teddy boys and then there was mods. You know, you kind of look at it, this is like this and this. But it's not. It's probably the same guy, age 14, 15. By the time he's 19, 20, he's got into different stuff. It's probably the same guy. And then, you know, and anyone who's kind of being a mod revivalist is missing the point of what mod was. The whole point of mod was like, I want to be doing something new and I want to be doing something different. So if you're trying to kind of ape that as a kind of you know, as a kind of uniform, then you're missing the point of what those guys originally were doing anyway. You know.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I think it's really good for young people to get into subcultures and to go through those kind of phases. But then you do get to a certain age where it's like, okay, well, I should be living in the present and not just aping a set style. You know? Well,
yeah,
I mean,
and it's something I agree, and it's something I always come back to, is that idea of like, if you have all this stuff to play with, and if you have all these things out there, what's the point of limiting yourself? You know, I think it's very, you know, it's pretty boring really to just like only consider a look, you know, within a very certain short time, when you have 120, 130 years of stuff which is wearable and it's probably out there in second-hand shops and, you know, available for you to try. Or just see, you know, I'm more interested in the similarities between things than I am in the difference between things. You know, definitely.
Well,
you know,
have
and
a sort of magpie approach to style. You're very eclectic. I mean, that's the word I would probably say more than anything else that I think of when I think of your stuff.
Thank you.
Which I think is good. And most of those, and in fact, most of those subcultures that we talk about started out as eclectic collections of other things. It was taking Jamaican stuff and French stuff and Italian stuff and American stuff and mixing it up, and
and also being what you could literally get hold of at the time. One of the guys from this, I live in a part of London called Stoke Newington. I think you've been to you know where I am. But this is quite an interesting area. Lots of people came from here. Malcolm McLaren's from here, but also Mark Bolan's from here. And Mark Bolan, he lived 200 to 300 yards up the road. And
is there a blue plaque?
There's not a blue plaque. Used to live in this flat. Used to before I did, also lived in a place over the road and in the estate that he grew up in. And his mum would always come around, and she was a bit demented, and she would be like, "Oh, my Mark was on TV today. Did you see him?" And of course, Mark Bolan was unfortunately at this point been dead for 20 years, but she was still convinced he was on the TV, and she was going around asking him. But he was being written about when he was 13, 14 years old in this area as a dresser, as a Stamford Hill, Stoke Newington dresser. And he was there at 13, 14. I've got 40 suits. I've got 100 ties. I've got 14 jackets. Running his trap, talking about like all his clothes. It goes back. The roots of all this stuff goes far back into. You learn all the time about new things. I'm fascinated by those French gangs of the 30s who had a really similar approach, very kind of modish kind of style. There always seems to be something going on, that you can learn about, something you don't know about.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. You think that you sort of, I used to think I knew everything, and then I'm always finding out new things.
All I know is I don't know nothing.
Right. Yeah. Do you think that there's any connection between your impulse in clothing yourself and record collecting? I've been thinking a lot about this lately, about collecting things and if the two things are related.
Probably. I think they are from a kind of affliction point of view, in a sense of like, is it a part of your character that needs to, to amass things? Absolutely. Which is not necessarily the most positive thing, but I think it's true. But I also think it's more about that, wanting the tangible and wanting to really get to the grips with something by having it, and then also seeing what else there is. Because you can be one of those person who hears about a band and then wants to just get the greatest hits and be done with it, or you can be the kind of person who wants to literally hear every second of music and thing that these people produce before you make an opinion on it. And I think that's probably something similar that drags you through buying things and owning them and amassing them and seeing where you are. But also I think it's interesting because the instant access that you have these days to things at your fingertips probably makes that less of a, when I was, before the internet, before everything else, growing up at a time that you did with that was the only way first-hand texts, first-generation texts were the only way you were actually going to amass anything, whether it was a book or a record or a piece of clothing or something. The only way you're going to get it is to go and find it and get it yourself. It's not like where you could just log on and, have a Wikipedia page of everything,
Or have an algorithm tell you, do you like this band? You'll like that band.
Which is fine. I don't mind that. I think you can be a grumpy old man about that and be like, well, these kids, they don't understand. They don't know. But so that's fine. If that is the case where it's a cultural level playing field and everything's available at your fingertips, fine. What is it then about the way you filter things, and what is it about the way what you take in and what you discard and what you think about and what you take on and what you get rid of that makes you special then? If it's not just a question of just saying, look at all my shit, which is what it used to be. You're literally, you go to your friend's house and you'd be like, look at my shit. What about
the sort of common record collector passion for obscurity? I mean, that's another. It's to find something that other people don't have.
Yeah, of course.
Is there analogous sort of sartorial impulse?
Definitely, and that goes back to that mod thing. I think that I think especially for an English guy, that mod mentality, which was that you wanted to know everything ahead of everyone, and you wanted to move ahead faster than everyone, and you wanted to be into something else a little bit quicker than everyone, and then tell them that you were. I think that's always going to be prevalent in like British youth cultures and the way I grew up and with the people I grew up with. It was always the same. It's like, you're like, I know a little bit more, or I'm a little bit better dressed, or I have a little bit of a better opinion on it. And I like that. I like that one-upmanship, because I think it's like, it keeps it going. It's a dynamo. It moves it forward and it keeps you on your toes, and also I think it's kind of a smart, and maybe that's just a very male thing, like in general about everything. I mean, I think it's the same whenever you see anyone on the internet. It doesn't matter what the subject is, it always seems to be the same. It's always like someone makes an opinion, then someone else says, you're full of shit, you're wrong, and then someone else comes along and goes, actually, guys, I think you're both right. It's just it doesn't matter what the subject is. There always seems to be a similar pattern of behavior with men in particular about how they deal with things, whether it's fly fishing or clothes or records or anything. Yeah, exactly. I think unfortunately it's an affliction.
Yeah. I think it's funny you mentioned that, because I was speaking to someone recently and they were saying they were frustrated by how much everyone in menswear plays nice and agrees with each other. Like how every time they go see a panel discussion, it's just everyone on stage kind of being like, yeah, me too. Yeah, I agree. Okay, yeah. Nobody ever sort of challenges anyone and says, oh, I think that's, boring or stupid or pointless, or which is fine. But
Yeah,
he was saying it wasn't as exciting as it could be. Maybe if people were
yeah,
being a
no,
little bit more honest about their opinions about things.
I mean, I agree. I have a few friends who are really outspoken, and and especially in the kind of podcast world where it's maybe a few of the same people you see a lot being interviewed. There's always people you can rely on. And my friend Gautier in Paris, for example, is a great example where he'll just come out and be like, "Nah, this is bullshit. This guy's good. This guy's shit. This is bad. This is good." And I just, he's a little bit younger and a little bit like angrier than me about the world, and I love it. I enjoy his company because of it, and I think it's great. It's just like, yes, go for it. I kind of want that. I think you're right. I think there is a little bit of it's a spark, and I think it's kind of missing from it. But also, everyone's got financial,
Of course. Well, yeah.
reasons to sort of it's kind
No one
of
wants to rock the boat too much.
yeah, exactly. Everyone has businesses they need to support, but it's true. It's just like it would be nicer if it was a bit more. But also, there's different approaches, I think, too. There's a lot the way that a lot of these guys approach it is, anathema to me. I don't understand. I don't. It's not my thing. The kind of technical approach to a lot of menswear writing.
Sure.
I don't
The
really
facts and
care.
figures kind of thing.
Don't really care.
Yeah, same.
Not my thing at all. If someone doesn't,
I'm sort of glad there are people out there who know about that stuff, so that's not lost or something. But it doesn't have any bearing on how I shop or dress.
Yeah, it's like, go ahead. It's great, but that's not really what I'm interested in. There's no fire. But it's also if you want to go back to that analogy about music. It's kind of one of the reasons why the music that I love, and also the format of music which I love, which is a 7-inch. I do think that whenever people talk about music, they always want to talk about best albums. 100 great albums, 20 great albums. But to me, it's like a lot of that is to do with a very consistent. It's got great consistency to it, or it's it's a really good album like across the board. I don't give a fuck. I want to hear the one bit in the one song that's wild and great, and so it's the same for me. Like growing up on hardcore, you could love a band because of like one half of one song on their demo, which was wild and great, and it didn't matter that their entire the rest of their career was inconsistent and sloppy. It was just like that one moment is really good. Yeah. And it's the same with Northern Soul. I collect a lot of soul records, and they're the same. There is wonderful 2-minute opuses, opera, plural of opus, which just have everything in them, and it doesn't need to be Radiohead's OK Computer or anything else which is considered, or Sergeant Pepper's or something. It's just like they can just be these sparks, these tiny things, and I'm much more interested in that than I am in anything more consistent and bigger and longer. I'm probably an ADHD kid. I like the small little things better. So maybe it's the same with dressing. Like when you look at people's outfits, maybe one thing they're wearing is just like, yeah, that's amazing. Right. And that's far more interesting to me than someone who has a very harmonious, thought about look.
I would agree with you. Does that carry over into things like literature and art? Do you prefer the
definitely
the intimate to the epic?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And also like an idea of there being some kind of like lack of consistency as being far more interesting than a kind of than a solid body of work. I
want to quickly get back to what you said about I guess they'd be the technical people, the people who are sort of like the audiophiles of menswear. They're the ones who would buy the 800-gram vinyl because
I mean, I met one guy at a party once he was his house, and he had spent £6,000-7,000 on the most incredible stereo system I'd ever seen, and I was talking to him about it, and I was like, "This is wild and great," and he owned 8 records, and of these 8 records, 3 of them were Boston albums, and it was. So there you go. Like that's
Yeah.
you know
That's some
that's a
American Psycho stuff right there.
that's a different world.
Yeah.
To me. You know.
Yeah. That's funny.
Mm.
I wanted to talk a little bit about going back to what we sort of started talking about at the beginning, about masculinity and style,
Hmm.
and not just sartorial style, but lifestyle and a lot of things.
Mm.
And I feel like you're very good at kind of striking this balance. You make an effort to strike this balance between being masculine, but also enjoying things that are elegant or refined and not tough.
Mm.
The fact that you and your wife took each other's names and hyphenated them, right?
Hmm.
That's, I mean, I think that takes a real man.
Thank you. Yeah.
Right?
I mean, yeah, that was never really in question. But for me, this is probably an aside, nothing to do with what you're saying. But to me, that was more about respecting. I love her family history, so it's just like, why would the point of us getting married kind of erase her side of the family history from our union? Like that doesn't make any sense to me. Like her grandfather, who's 101, it's still around, was in the resistance in Denmark during the war, moved to America, in the 50s. And the reason he moved to America was he heard that they wanted blacksmiths over there because he was a blacksmith,
Oh my
which
God.
is the best story I've
Yeah.
ever heard. So moves his family over there and proceeds to have like 8 children, in America, and has to learn, English, and then puts back. And it's just like, she tells me the story, and I'm like, this is so much more interesting than my story, because obviously being in England, my family is a lot more established and, boring, middle class. So here's this great family history. What am I going to do? Marry her and then try and get rid of that? It's just like, that doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's just like, it's a way of like also gaining access to that side of the family as well, and having our names together and then keeping that going. So, as an aside, no, I like that juxtaposition and the kind of, the frisson, I suppose, of like being a kind of, big guy, but also with things being kind of delicate as well, because that's, again, going back to that same thing of like a lack of consistency. That's maybe where the interests lie. That's maybe where those riffs are, and maybe where the interesting stuff happens, And especially when you think of things like, loafers, and I really only wear like quite delicate, small, loafers and Belgian shoes and things like that. And it's kind of slightly improbable, on this kind of big frame, big shoulders, to have these like dainty shoes. And I kind of like that, it's funny.
Yeah. Well, that's another good point, is that
Yeah.
I think fashion, menswear, lifestyle, luxury, those kind of things are often guilty of taking themselves far too seriously.
Way too seriously.
And I think you and the people who I find the most sort of enjoyable to actually see, people who I want to see what they're wearing, because I know it's going to be something interesting, are the ones who don't take it too seriously and who clearly have fun with it. And I sometimes worry, again, the technical people, I'm glad that they're there, but I sometimes worry that when people get into clothes, they get so bogged down in those kind of details that they forget to have fun with it, or they don't have a sense of humor about it.
I agree, but they're also probably driven by something different to come to that place. So maybe they're going to be there anyway, so that's fine. I also think that, like, once I've established that someone dresses well and I like their kind of, then it's discarded, and then it's about their character. And me wanting to spend time with them. Like, I'm much more interested in spending time and conversing with someone who has like knows something that I don't, and has a great knowledge, and can converse and everything else. So it's really it's almost like it's only the starting point, and then past that, it's much more about them as a person and everything else. I have a hell of a lot of friends that dress really badly. And I'm sure they won't want me saying that, but the whole point is, I don't give a fuck. They're my friends. It's just like that, and it's just like but it's also nice to have that interest in common with someone, and also to ask them something and have their viewpoint come back at you, like they thought about what they're wearing, and it's Oh, okay, yeah, no, that makes total sense to me. I suppose I should temper that by saying that it's much more like I'd rather someone goes about their life, whether it's what they dress, how they express themselves, and what they say in a thoughtful manner,
Hmm.
rather than in a thoughtless manner.
Yeah.
So, clothes is just a small part of that. You know what I mean?
I've talked a lot with my friend Kamau about this thing where I guess some people, when they get into something, they just get into that one thing. It becomes a
Mhm.
sort of monomania, and uh, which is fine, but they're not that interesting to talk to at a party, right? When they come up to
Yeah,
you, they just want to talk to you about, you know, your, how your buttonhole is sewn or something, and it kind of,
yeah.
and then you try to talk about other things, and it's like, well,
I mean, I'm sure me and you have actually had that at, events we've been at where we're literally where you're running away
yeah,
from those
from another
people.
person's like squeezing my shoulder, and
Yeah,
you know,
and you really just want to say because the whole, what could be better than turning up to a place where people are like dressed well and presented well, but then also talking to them and discovering that that is never a topic of conversation.
hmm
And
yeah,
really, everything else is on the table, and that's what you're talking about instead.
yeah,
What books they read, what stuff they're into,
yeah,
or what. Sorry, my phone's dying.
yeah. Okay.
Um, you know, I it's a very important. I think how you present yourself to the world is incredibly important and not shallow at all. And I think that's one of the misconceptions is somehow dressing well or presenting yourself in a way is shallow because of course that's not. It's the most fundamental thing how you present yourself to people, and everyone chooses to do it whether they acknowledge it or not.
Mm.
But also, but that's all it is. It's just your introduction. Because before you talk and before you're seen before you speak and before you open your mouth. So how you present yourself is paramount. But then it's done. Then it's about who you are as a person
Yeah.
and
But it's
everything
about
else
what you
about
do
your
when you're
character.
wearing the clothes, right? It's
Yeah,
not just
exactly.
yeah,
It's just like it's not wearing clothes. It's you know
yeah,
you happen to be wearing clothes and then you get on with your life.
right. Um, it's funny because also Turbonegro, the band you're in, is
Mm,
incredibly funny and tongue in cheek and doesn't take
mm,
itself too seriously,
mm,
which is one of the great things about it. In a genre that often is quite straight faced,
mm,
right? I I mean punk rock or whatever genre you want to call it.
mm.
Um, I don't know. I don't really know what question I have about that, but it just seems it
Thank you.
seems to be of a piece with your feeling your feeling about style.
I think so, and I think that's what I mean. Again, that's about a group of people who know each other and who are friends and who share. That's kind of how we talk and how we spend time together is that. So I suppose that's how it comes across. But also, again, that's probably about that kind of sense of what we were saying before about there not being year zeros. It's just like that band is kind of as glam and as like stadium rock as it
Mm-hmm.
is punk rock
Sure.
because it's just like there's no probably to us there's not really much difference between those things,
Mm-hmm.
and also it's an extravagance and it's extra and it's about going into a mode and going into a character, so it's not about the everyday. So the fact is it is a character that all of us are playing on stage, the character of being in that band, and so it's liberating to be able to just step into that
Yeah.
and it not be the person who you are off stage. Like to be that character in your
Mm-hmm.
daily life would be, you know,
Right. Yeah, you'd probably
you
get in
know,
trouble.
yeah, you get in trouble, and also it would be pretty boring. It'd
Yeah.
be fairly mundane. It's just like the whole point is that you're stepping into this, this lineage of Alice Cooper, Freddie Mercury,
Mm.
David Johansen, blah blah
Yeah.
blah blah blah. All these kind of things, and I'm kind of respecting that tradition, but also knowing that you leave it on stage.
Right. And it's, in fact, I think those characters, because they're so original and that they don't fall into the trap of novelty either. It doesn't come
Mm.
off like that, which can happen when you're being too, I don't know, ironic about things or something, I guess.
That's it. I mean, I think the irony is is absolutely the sort of dead end street. it's a nonsense. It's just like everything you do and the way you present yourself. It reminds me a lot of those people who get drunk and behave in a way which is utterly abhorrent and then blame the fact that they were drunk. It's just like there's something in you which did that. You behave like that for a reason. And I think it's the same.
You probably got drunk in order to do it.
Yeah, exactly. It was an enabling, thing. So I think it's kind of the same with like presenting something in that way. It's just like clearly you're leaning into something, and you're leaning into something which you feel is worthy and doing it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's how you are as in your everyday. It's just like, of course, it's just like Turbo is meant to be an exaggeration. It's meant to be cartoonish. It's meant to be larger than life. And then so for the visual props to be makeup and this thing, that's the idea. It's just like it is meant to be. For me, it's helpful to put that on and become that. And then it's helpful for the audience to see that it's larger than life, that it's something that they don't see every day. It's not just a guy who's coming on, it's not the grunge thing. And this is the thing, that period when that band came around, well, there was grunge, and then there was like hardcore and post-hardcore, and all these things that were very much about being true and being real and being yourself. And it's just like, no, this is all about specifically not doing that and specifically entering into a place which is different, and which is a step above or a step away. And so that's what it is, and what could be better? I mean, isn't that what you want? I mean, that's what you expect, I think, from actors, and that's what you expect from a movie, and that's what you expect. So why would you not expect that from your entertainment as well?
This is a sort of related question, but in an age when every busybody with no sense of humor has an internet connection and a lot of time on their hand, how come a band as irreverent as Turbonegro hasn't drummed up more controversy?
I think probably because ultimately, I think because we're a small band and we're probably a niche band, I think we exist in a world where everyone's, I don't want to say in on the joke, because that sounds sort of, reductive. But I think that everyone understands that, I mean, it's something I've thought about a lot. I think we live in this weird age at the moment where it's just like the prevailing winds are a lot more right wing than I ever could conceive would happen, and a lot more, and a lot more a lot more against all the things that I hold dear. And so it's just like when a lot of my humor and a lot of the humor that we represent is maybe playing with those images and playing with those ideas. It's difficult to sit yourself in a way that you don't want people to think that somehow you're supportive of those, elements. And that is something that we talk about a lot, amongst ourselves, or think about a lot, especially, with Tom in particular, who has always been the kind of like, communication center of the band, is clearly incredibly like socially democrat and occasionally, anti-Trump, and and he's an American citizen and has his own issues with that. So it for him, it's kind of funny to think that like somehow we could be misconstrued in what we say is that, which is simply just about, I think this is for a band. This is the Friday night band. It's the kind of like, you've had the week that you've had, and then you're going to get, you're going to do a line of coke, and you're going to get really hammered, and you're going to listen to us, which is a very important role to have. You know, that's a responsibility. To be a party band is probably more of a responsibility than to be a kind of real, like a real emotional band.
So we've got about 10 minutes. I wanted to ask, are there any things that you think are overrated? Do you have any Emperor's New Clothes kind of moments where you're like, why does everyone like this?
Every day. Hundreds of times every day. But that's fine. That's also, but also I think I'm old enough now and kind of mature enough to know that they're not necessarily for me, and me not understanding them or not necessarily is not something that grinds me, because I'm like, that's fine. Like I'm very happy to not be involved and not to have an opinion as well. You know, yeah, I think there's a great freeing thing of just like, oh, that's nothing to do with me.
Right.
How good is that? You know,
Yeah.
at the same time, it's like,
Yeah, I do
that's
feel like
fine.
once you get to a certain age, it's like, oh yeah, you know what? I don't need to
I don't need to worry about
hate on
that.
that kind of stuff.
That's
I'm sort of
fine.
confused by things. Now, I've got
Oh yeah.
a slight confession to make. I have an Emperor's New Clothes moment that involves you and several of our friends.
Okay, please tell me. This is
And,
okay. So this is all leading up to something.
well, it's because this has been on my mind a lot, and Sarah's mind too.
Mm.
That trattoria in Florence with the butter pasta and butter chicken.
Mm.
We didn't get it.
Sostanza.
Yeah,
Really?
I mean, we just like we were not we. It was it was the weirdest thing. But Sarah and I were like, I don't know why everyone's making such a big deal out of this. And it was just such a strange kind of thing because everyone was like, and we felt pressured to be like, oh yeah, it's great, because everyone was like, oh, this is so good, and we were like, yeah, it's good, it's fine. It was a sort of surreal moment because everyone else loved it so much, except I think me, Sarah, and Teddy were kind of like, what's the big deal? I think just racist Americans or what, but
no, that's again totally fine. I think that there is I think that if you grew up going to restaurants, especially not grew up, I said too much, but if you've been going to restaurants for the last 20 years in sort of major metropolitan areas, London being one of them, but I think you're very used to this kind of like sense that everything is bigger than it is and everything's different to what it is, and there's a sense of like, you know, that there's a sense of theatre and drama around things, and you look at something on the menu and then when it comes it's slightly different and it's elevated. So I think going somewhere where it's just like you look at the menu and it says beans and you get a plate of beans like in oil with salt, it's just, for me it's just like, oh, this is incredible.
okay.
You know,
yeah.
And the same with, you know, the tomatoes, it's literally sliced tomatoes with salt, then it's really good. And but also at the same time the butter chicken, I mean, I don't know, if you don't dig the butter chicken at Stanza in terms of just like as it just tastes on your mouth, then there's something inherently wrong with you. I'm just kidding.
I knew that if anyone, because I figured if anyone could convince me that I was wrong about my own taste buds, I thought it would be you.
That's my death row meal.
Really?
You know?
Wow.
Yeah.
Sarah, she's a vegetarian, so she just had the pasta. And she was like, well, this is what kids order at restaurants.
Yeah.
Like spaghetti with butter.
I know what you mean, but I think if she'd had but did she have the artichoke flan? Like, which is just one of the most, which is artichokes in the middle and then the whipped eggs around the outside. Next time, get Sarah to come back, we'll do that. But yeah, no, Sostanza is definitely, that's death row type stuff. Yeah. But okay, well, I'll bring up something you said. You and Sean were talking. I saw on one of your little like bitch fests that you do on here, and I was watching, and it was quite funny because one of you said something about, oh, you know, you should only wear 2 items, not 3 items of your face at the same time. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Let me think about that. And I was processing it, and I was looking at the red glasses you were wearing, and I was like, well, that's kind of true because there are a lot of information in those glasses, so you probably should temper it down. And then he said, what about Tony Sylvester? He was, right. and I was just like, whoa. Yeah. And it was this weird moment in real time where I was looking at you two talking about something and then thinking about it in a serious level, because both of you are people whose opinion I trust and listen to. And I was like, and then my name came up, and then I was almost tempted to like sort of bust in on your session and be like, no, listen, let me tell you. But you're absolutely right. I am bald, which is one of those things that. But I did think about that because it's not necessarily about wearing 2 items. The difference between wearing 2 items and 3 items or information is about also the volume of those items themselves. So the fact that you were wearing, were they red or were they? They were bright.
They have. I don't have the non-glare lenses, which I should have. So they.
But the frames of them are
frames are big. They're big, sort of Michael Caine, Jarvis Cocker kind of.
But they're white. They're red. They're yellow. They're something. What are they?
They're black.
Yeah, not the ones you were wearing that day. or maybe they were. Anyway, but I think it's a. But I think it's about. I think it's a.
Oh, were
but
they
it's
sunglasses?
yeah, there were
Oh,
sunglasses.
yeah. They have a sort of red. Yeah, yeah.
So I was thinking, it is more about the relative volume or relative or of the items themselves. You're absolutely right. Like if you walk into a room with a giant beard, big fucking sunglasses, and a cowboy hat, that's too much information. But you could come in somewhere with like a light beard, light glasses, and a lighter hat, and it would work. There would be some accord there.
Right.
So
I mean, I've often wondered if because my grandfather and my great grandfather and my great grandfather were both Sikhs.
Yeah, and
had turbans and very big, very impressive beards. And it's interesting because what I think about if I was observant or if my grandfather had been observant or something, that's it seems like such a major baseline to have to start from.
Yeah.
Like, these two things are set. You have to have these. Like, you can go from there. And I think it's why someone like Waris Aliwalia does a sort of minimalist kind of thing on top of that. You know, he doesn't
that works. Totally, and but also it's to do with maybe the culture that you're in and what everyone else is doing, because I'm sure in a room full of Sikh men with full beards and full turbans, someone walking in with like Elton John glasses is going to be the tip above, whereas someone walking in with some tortoise shell, smaller, it's just it is all about there's a volume there, and then also relativity, I suppose, as well.
Have you ever looked at the Sikh style blogs? Quite a lot of them in Canada and in England.
No, but my wife's Canadian, as you know, so obviously, I see a lot of the stuff just on the CBC,
Sure.
Politics. But no, I don't. I don't look at the Sikh style, but please.
Well, it's just interesting because it's one of these things where it's not a subculture, it's a religion, but it's they've developed the young men have developed a kind of modern, unique style that's very much their own, that goes with their religious garb, which is kind of interesting to me. Sometimes they're prey to all the same trends as everyone else, and they're wearing suits that are too tight for them half the time. But like.
In that specific blue, shiny blue color that everyone wears these days.
High mohair content, shiny blue. Yeah, that's the Ryan Gosling blue. Anyway, thanks for talking with me, Tony. This has been a pleasure.
It has been. Thank you very much.
Any big news coming up? Any band news or
no?
News?
I think with all the band stuff, it's just like it's all on hiatus at the moment until this all gets sorted out. And almost the same with work. We're just like, I think like all brands, we've pivoted onto online and into content, and we're hoping that sees us through to a period where there's some kind of physical presence again, and it looks good. We're happy. I think we're in the same boat as everyone else. We're a small brand. We're adaptable. So hopefully we can weather this storm. But I mean, you can't. Everyone's in the same boat.
Yeah.
So you're not. There's no point in saying anything negative or anything woe is me about anything at the moment, because there are people who are doing better than you. There are people doing worse than you, and we all have to try and strive to find a way to come through this together. And we'll see. Let's talk in 6 months.
Yeah. Good talking to you, man.
Thanks, Natty. I appreciate it. I miss you too. I hope we see each other, in the flesh very soon.
Yeah. You got to come to New Orleans.
I would love to. I've never been, and I would love to come.
Oh my God. Yeah, you'd love it.
I'm ready.
All right.
Thanks,
Night, Tony.
Speak to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.